Hey, I'm Rhiannon and this is Travel Talking, the Travel Talk podcast. Travel Talk is the app that helps you connect with fellow travellers wherever you are in the world. We are the voice of real travellers, discovering the world one country at a time, with a few guests joining us and an entire planet to cover.
Go your own way.
Welcome to the show this week. I'm joined here by Joe.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, thanks. We're here to talk about cultural travel. We're going to be looking at our picks this year for what's currently the hot thing to do if you're traveling this summer in Europe. And later in the episode, we're going to be hearing from Josh Gibbs, who has done an art residency in China. I actually met Josh when we were traveling in Bulgaria a couple of summers ago. And at the end, we're going to finish off with a new segment called Little Lies.
Very exciting.
Yes. So Little Lies actually is going to be a place where we try to stop other travellers making the same mistakes that I guess we've all tended to make in the past. And actually, it's somewhere where we can sort of say, hey, watch out. There's some unscrupulous people out there and you don't want to get ripped off. I mean, we've all been ripped off a little bit while travelling, but it really sucks when you have a little bit of cash to go traveling and you get ripped off. So basically our new segment in the show is Little Lies, where we'll be hearing from people who have found themselves in the middle of a scam, and we want to help them we want to help you avoid being in the same situation. But anyway, let's go back to cultural travel. Joe, what does cultural travel mean to you?
Well, I actually looked up the definition of this, and apparently the key to cultural travel is that it's the antithesis of tourism. So when you're engaging in tourism, you are bringing your home environment with you wherever you go and applying it to whatever you see. Whereas if you're traveling culturally, then you're leaving everything behind, really immersing yourself in the culture of that country, learning about it, and really having like an authentic experience where you go. And I think this is just really important to really enjoy a trip in the first place. You know, you want to go to obviously the galleries and the museums, but you also want to learn about the history of the place. And it's the best way to really bring history to life is to go to, you know, like I went to like Ellis Island and like Alcatraz, even dark places like Dachau. And, you know, that's how you really learn about what's happened in all of these different places and different cultures.
Well, that's right. I mean, a beach is not just a beach and a city is not just a city. And I personally do go traveling to these places to really understand what happened there previously. And, you know, I think there are people that go out there to travel and drink and party and lounge on the beach. But I don't know about you, but I always find myself after a couple of days of doing that, I suddenly think, I'm in this amazing place. I've never been there before. I don't know anything about the culture. What is there to discover?
Yeah, like I want to actually come back from here and have learned something and not just be a lot fatter and more tired.
Well, exactly. I mean, there are some sort of enjoyable sides to experiencing travel and relaxing, but certainly, you know, Europe is its own cultural gem with all sorts of different cultures really mishmashed and squished in together. I certainly noticed that coming from Australia, where we're on a giant island of all the same things. So looking at Europe this year and some picks, Joe, what did you kind of come across that interests you?
Yeah, so there's firstly just some stuff in London that I'm really excited about this summer. I really want to get to the Stanley Kubrick exhibition in the Design Museum, just because, you know, I just love The Shining and it just looks fascinating. And then I don't know if you've seen the Christian Dior exhibition in the V&A that's happening.
No, I haven't, but I'm very keen to go. Is it open already now?
Yeah, it's open now until the 11th of August. So I'm going to try and get to that one. And then because I'm planning a trip to Copenhagen this summer, I really want to get to their EU exhibition, which might not be a barrel of laughs, but it's all based around...
Are you still welcome there as a British person?
I hope so, till October anyway. It's all based around Brexit and the European elections. So I think that would be a very good way for me to learn about something that I frankly don't pay enough attention to be honest. And then I also want to go to Scotland this summer, and there's a Golden Retriever Festival there, which I think would just be just lovely. So that's also on my list.
What happens at a Golden Retriever Festival?
I think they just sort of, you know, do little races and people just bring their dogs and you just have a nice day by a castle. So, you know, sounds good to me.
Nothing to argue with there.
Yeah.
I can almost imagine the backdrop, these beautiful golden retrievers, happy countryside. I mean, the whole point of our podcast today, obviously, is talking about cultural travel in a different way. And I certainly did not know that there was such thing as a golden retriever festival in Scotland. Most people know Hogmanay or, tend to go for the tattoo. But I think part of what we talk about on this podcast is always about getting off the beaten track. And, you sort of started with mentioning the stuff on in London, and we live in London. We are so lucky. I think every week it's almost impossible to discuss all the cultural delights that you can find in this city. But I certainly did have the Dior exhibition on my list, and I know that most people come to London and think, oh, there's the Tate Modern to see, but we're also about heroing the places off the beaten track. I mean, the V&A Museum, I guess, in London is relatively well known, but I suppose if you're a tourist incoming, it might not be your first pick. And I think it is important to help people see that cultural travel doesn't mean the obvious museum or the main art gallery, but it's also all the sorts of things that you're not going to discover unless you dig a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah, and I know when I went to New York, I had like such a more amazing time at the Whitney than I did at the Met, just because it was like a small exhibition and like really different stuff. I think it was a Jeff Koons exhibition when I went, whereas the Met was just enormous and like far too much for me to even know where to start.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've always found when I travel, the hidden delights for me are sort of the things that I never expected to find. And when I look at my picks for the summer, in terms of cultural travel, I actually, well, really my pick is not Oktoberfest, but I chose it because it's almost unfair to ignore Oktoberfest if you're looking at festivals. But it actually is one of these strange ones that sits in the middle. A lot of people would go to Oktoberfest pretty much to get drunk and go on a bunch of rides, but actually my experience is that I never actually did Oktoberfest the traditional way, but I did go to Munich. I did buy the Dirndl, and I have been in Austria as well as Germany a few times, and stumbled upon a little festival in the height of summer where people in a local town are dressed in their local outfit and they're drinking beer. And that for me was something so much more rewarding. We'd just come across the border from Tyrol. We were heading back into Munich. We'd taken a train for the day, and actually we'd been cycling through the mountains. And as we were coming back towards the train, we stumbled across a tiny little village that was actually having a party, and everyone was dressed up in, that Oktoberfest gear. And we were probably one of the only foreigners in the direct area. But for me, that was almost equally as rewarding as going to the main Oktoberfest, because I felt like I had stumbled upon something that was a real reflection of what people in that town did. And that to me is what cultural travel can be about.
Yeah, I really enjoyed being in like this tiny French village on Bastille Day, just as a day that you never really consider in the UK, and then you're in this tiny little village and suddenly there's all these fireworks and there's beer everywhere and wine and everyone's having a big party, and it's just, yeah, you'd never have known it was there otherwise.
Well, that's right. And we know these places like Bastille Day as obviously, oh, that might be a good weekend to visit a country simply because you know that things are going to be going on. But I think, when you do arrive in one of those places, it's the heart and soul of why people celebrate that occasion within their own country that ultimately gives you such an enjoyable experience, because you're part of this passion that they have for that particular topic that you find yourself there amongst.
Yeah, and if you don't know what it's for as well, if you're like, hey, what's everyone celebrating? People are, more than happy to explain to you like the history and what it's for and everything, just because they're just excited to have their big celebration day.
Well, that's right. They share a bit more with you. In fact, two of the other two things that I picked for cultural travel this summer was actually one that I guess is quite unknown, and I mean the name itself might not even mean anything. It's EDP Cool Jazz, and actually it runs through summer in Portugal. Now we've got a fair bit of content on Portugal on traveltalk.co at the moment. It seems to be the destination, whether it's Porto or Lisbon, but this particular festival is actually near Cascais, and Cascais is a little further out of Lisbon. It's about an hour away by the train, and it's a beautiful little seaside town. And I think, for people that have been to Portugal, they'd understand how accessible it is. But I certainly know that when I was in Lisbon for the weekend, I sort of ticked the boxes of the main things to do. And then I had, a Sunday spare. And I thought, well, what do I do today? And actually, it was perfect. There were this jazz festival on the park every weekend. And all the locals would rock up with a bit of vino verde and some food, and just sit around and listen to the music. And I think festivals also don't have to be, the big mainstream events. It can just be sort of understanding, what do the locals do on that weekend during summer, and how can we tap into that?
Yeah, exactly. I remember Tom's piece on Madrid talking about how anywhere he went, he could just see flamenco dancing, and like how cool that was, that it's just happening all around you all the time.
My final pick, actually, because I thought, we are talking about cultural travel and it's unfair not to mention an art gallery, is the Banksy Museum in Amsterdam. I think it's now at the Moko Gallery, but I went in 2016, and I think it had just opened. And, Banksy is fairly well known across the world. And sometimes I think with large artists, you sort of feel like, they're trying to capitalize and make money off of someone's art. I'd say probably Banksy is one of the few people that you would expect to stand up against that. And I went to Amsterdam thinking, when you come to Amsterdam, there's probably other things that you would go see first ahead of Banksy. I mean, you've got Van Gogh, of course. But I stumbled into this museum, and I think, it honestly sits within my top 5, mainly because of the way that they did it. And also they really geared the exhibition towards, I suppose, people who travel like me, that, are discerning, that want to sort of explore the world around them and scratch the surface and dig a little bit deeper. And I think, the way that they picked different art, it just really spoke to me at that point in time as I was traveling through Amsterdam. So, personally, I feel that cultural travel is also about, the experience that you're going through at that particular point in time, and what you can take away from what you're seeing.
It's always nice to have an option like that as well, for if you don't want to go to the big popular Van Gogh museum, then you always have the option to go somewhere that not as many people have heard of, and it won't be as crowded, which is always nice.
Hopefully we've given our listeners out there a little bit of inspiration around the cultural activities that exist in Europe this summer. We've barely touched upon them.
Oh yeah, there's heaps. I mean, there's the tomato throwing festival, there's like wine festivals, there's obviously like running with the bulls. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff happening across the continent,
including a golden retriever festival.
Exactly. And there's a pig festival in France with little piglet races and pig outfits. It's so cute.
So, I mean, that may as well just be a call out there. If anyone has, found a rather random cultural activity on their travels, always feel free to get in touch, DM us on Travel Talking Instagram. We're always excited to hear stories from people on the ground, and certainly if it's something you think is fit for traveltalk.co, please don't hesitate to let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. We're always looking for stuff like that. And I definitely want to see pictures of the piglets if anyone goes.
Find other solo travellers nearby. Search for Travel Talk on the App Store.
We're about to be joined by Josh Gibbs, who, as I mentioned, is currently doing an art residency in China. Hi, Josh. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
We first met, didn't we, in Bulgaria back in 2016 when we were just randomly traveling.
Yeah, I was in Velikotanovo.
At the time, you told me that you were heading off to Asia to do an art residency, and I found that really interesting. So I thought it'd be great to have you on the Travel Talking podcast and hear a bit more about it, especially for people who are studying specifically art, because this particular segment we're talking about cultural travel. And I thought maybe you could share with other people that might, be aspiring artists or even just find it fascinating, your journey, how you kind of came to be in China doing an art residency.
I guess I found residencies online and through word of mouth usually. Yeah, I just trawled through a lot, applied for a load of residencies, some of which I didn't get, some of which I heard back and got.
Okay, and for the less artistically inclined like myself, what actually is an artistic residence?
A whole number of things can take place. It can just be a studio space to work in with no particular obligations for a set period of time. Can be as short as a week. It can be as long as a year or longer, perhaps even. I think there's the Rijks Academy in Amsterdam, which is a pretty popular one, a very competitive one, which I think is up to 2 years.
In China, what did yours consist of?
The first one I've done 5 in China. I'm currently doing one now, including this one.
Wow.
The first one was not too central. Like, the studio was like a live-in studio. All the other artists that took part lived alongside in similar units. It was like,
So there was a few of you there. You're not
yeah,
sort of the only artist. And ultimately, what drew you to China to do this over other countries?
my work's to do with construction and housing, and China seemed like the next logical step. Construction and housing is a phenomenon here in the way that the country's just growing so rapidly.
And you kind of mentioned that because of the specific focus of your art, you felt like China was a good place for you to kind of maybe learn some of the local cultures. And given this particular show, we're talking about cultural travel. What do you think by being an artist in residence in China has allowed you to sort of see of the local community that you otherwise wouldn't have if you were just passing through as a tourist?
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's a more in-depth focus on like the communities. Certainly, traveling in Bulgaria, I got some idea, but not on the same scale as I have here. Just a matter of time and being living somewhere, you get to really see the patterns of life.
And when you talk about local construction, I mean, does that mean as a artist in residence that you get sort of some privilege where you can, I suppose, get connected with locals in a way that you otherwise couldn't if you just walked in off the street and said, hey, I'm an artist, I'm interested in learning more about your building designs? Do you find that, you have a local representation or some local friends that help you connect with those cultures?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even something simple like buying cement. There was a guy who was working for the residency who would help me find the cement and take me to these kind of building sites and building supplies yards and just meet people selling the stuff, and you can just see the process on the ground, how it all works and how it all fits into the kind of overall construction of the area, and then on a wider basis the city. And
it sounds simple, right, to sort of say a local helped you to get concrete. But I think one of the things I've struggled with quite often when I'm traveling or living in another country is the things that we all know are very easy to do for us, whether that's, connect to internet, get electricity. But when you're actually a foreigner and you don't speak the language.
I've gotten a lot bolder at this kind of thing where you just go and ask.
Yeah, I mean, traveling does obviously, I think, work on everyone's confidence, whether you're doing it for work, an internship, or just traveling for your own personal self. What do you think, having been out in China now for 2 years, is perhaps the biggest shift for you? What do you think 2 years on have you found out about yourself, or what do you think you've got the most out of for your time in China?
I guess just an insight into a country where individuals aren't regarded. It's especially with construction, it's just things just get built. It doesn't matter who's in the way, or it's not like people can appeal that their homes will get knocked down. There's less of that compared to back in the UK. Things move a lot faster.
I mean, just saying, you've obviously decided to stay out there for 2 years, so something has kept you there. Are you ready to move on, or do you think you're going to stay a bit longer?
It's a tough one. Cool, really. I just feel like the project is never finished, so I feel I can't, or sometimes I feel I can't anyway. It just feels never ending. I guess you just have to say no at one point, perhaps, if you just want to go back home. But
you sound like a true artist, internally conflicted.
Yeah. It's a big country and it's got a huge, rich, long-standing culture that's, you feel like it sucks you in a bit, which it definitely does.
Thanks for sharing a little bit more about what it's like to do an art residency in China. And I suppose, something that I guess many people don't get an opportunity to do, but also doing that in such a foreign country to your own culture. Hopefully anyone out there who is currently an artist and looking at residencies, I know that we've welcomed Josh to come and write a little bit about his experiences on traveltalk.co, so those will be coming up in the next month. But for now, Little Lies is where we stop you from making the same mistakes other travellers have made themselves on the road. We all know that it sucks to be ripped off out there when you're travelling, and unfortunately there are unscrupulous people out there who do prey on unsuspecting tourists, often specifically ones that look like, from their perspective, it doesn't matter if they lose a bit of cash. Now, I'm not talking about people who get ripped off a couple of quid here and there. I'm talking about, those things where you're like, oh my God, I almost lost a couple of £100. That's not fair. I'm trying to be respectful to locals and I don't really want to be seen as a target. And actually, as mentioned, I've got Josh here to kick off this segment for our series. And him and I traveled in Bulgaria together. We started off in Veliko Tarnovo, we went to Varna, and then we ended up in Plovdiv. And we just arrived in Plovdiv. It's a lovely Roman old town in Bulgaria.
It was the first evening when we first arrived.
And we went on a walking tour, right? Around 6 p.m.
Yeah, I guess we were a bit tired as well. But it was you that noticed the guy.
This is an interesting scam, in my opinion, because it's actually a scam that continues over a couple of days. So what actually happened is Josh and I rock up to a walking tour. We didn't know a single person in the world in Plovdiv. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other tourists, and we got kind of chatty with a couple of Americans. And, you know, as we went through these beautiful places in Plovdiv, Roman amphitheater, to name a few, people started talking to us on the tour. And one guy came up to me, and he was a Bulgarian guy, and he started a conversation. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, how cool. I'm meeting a local. It's nice to hear a little bit from his point of view. But I did think, why the hell does a Bulgarian come on a walking tour in his own town? And he did tell me that actually it was just something that he wanted to do. He wanted to discover his own local neighborhood. And I thought, fair enough. Now, Josh, you obviously were on the same walking tour. And I think at moments we separated and took pictures, etc. But you didn't think much of the guy at the time. Obviously, we briefly met and talked with him. But we sort of finished the walking tour and went off for dinner, right?
Yeah, and you said you thought briefly it might have been dodgy. And I kind of, when you said that, I kind of thought the same, but then you were like, oh, he just said he came across quite honest and said that he just wanted to see another side of his own town, and that kind of made sense to me. It seemed like a rare thing to happen, but it kind of seemed explainable, I guess.
Exactly. And, you know, also, I think it's very important not to be judgmental. I try certainly not to be suspicious as a traveller, because obviously that leads you into the wrong direction. Now, it was the next day, wasn't it, when actually from the walking tour, we met a couple of different people and we all decided to do some sightseeing around Plovdiv the next day based on the walking tour. And it was, funnily enough, we were going through one of the main parks that had an appealing water feature, which, in fact, the guy on the walking tour the night before had said, make sure you go and check out this park with this water feature. Now, it was about 3:00 in the afternoon. There was 4 of us and we were walking past this park, and suddenly he drove past on a bicycle, right?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, he came by.
And he was really friendly, had great English, and he was like, hey, guys. And we're like, oh, hey, that's right, you're from the walking tour. And it couldn't be more coincidental. Now, obviously, again, this is where the beauty of what we think was the scam is, because obviously you're on a walking tour, you don't know anyone, you meet a local, you think that's super cool, you want to get in touch with locals. He mentions a place for someone to go the next day, and sure enough, they're going to pop up there at some point, and he just happened to swing by as we were wandering by the fountain, and for us, of course, it seemed very serendipitous.
Very casual, but also quite smooth looking.
He was. The sort of person that you would ultimately say, no, actually, I'm trying to, connect locally with people, and he seems like someone that I can. Now, probably our memory is a bit hazy, but I think this is what happened next. He mentioned that he could show us something locally that most people don't get to see, right?
Yeah, it was a tobacco factory, I think.
Exactly.
A warehouse of some kind. And I'm really into abandoned spaces, so You were
quite keen. I mean, everyone was keen. I was keen. I wanted to see this random abandoned tobacco factory that was 20 minutes out of town.
Now, I threw caution to the wind by the time. Once that was on the cards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. So he sort of told us it's off the beaten track, which, appeals to tourists like ourselves. Now, there was 4 boys, I think, and myself, and he's sort of telling us that this tobacco factory is quite a long way away. Now, he sort of starts leading us there. And as I realised, that morning we'd also gone to the ATM, right? Because you kind of have to stock up every so often on local cash when you arrive in a new place.
It was pretty quickly after we'd been to the ATM that we saw this guy. That's what.
Yeah.
Because you hung back with me afterwards once you became suspicious. I do remember that.
That's right. And I said to you, I was like, Josh, I'm just pointing this out. We've all just gone to the ATM. We have about a couple of hundred, euros equivalent in our pocket. And we have a random guy that we met last night leading us to the outskirts of town to a tobacco factory. Does this seem odd to you? And you sort of said, I mean, from your perspective, you weren't 100% sure, but you did agree that maybe we should be careful, right?
Once you said that, I was starting to feel pretty cautious. Definitely, I wanted to pull the plug.
Exactly. And then we went up to, I sort of, the American guys were walking ahead, and I just went up to them and said, hey, just flagging this, I don't want to make a scene, but what do you think? And sure enough, we all just sort of said, look, between us, we've got probably 500 euro in our pocket, and actually, we don't know this person. So we did. We called it quits and we sort of walked away. And I think, funnily enough, the other guys traveling with us got a little bit more suspicious than we did. We can't honestly confirm if, this was a scam at the end of the day or not. But what we did go and do is go back to the walking tour, because the walking tour kicks off every night at 6:00. So they know that there'll always be a fresh group of tourists.
I remember us pulling the plug quite politely to the guy, though. If we could go back to that a second, what we said we were going to have a Skype conversation with one of our friends back at the hostel.
Well, that's right. We had to come up with a decent excuse just in case, there was a tobacco factory. But I think, it's fair to say that we never really, having done a bit of research, that tobacco factory, I don't think is listed at the top things to do in Plovdiv. And ultimately, we can never be sure. But we did go back to the walking tour, and we did sort of mention to people, hey, beware. And I think the walking tour people themselves didn't seem that fussed. And it's one of those things where, ultimately, we'd never on this show try to suggest people are doing things that are wrong if they're not. But I certainly feel like we did dodge a bullet that day, and that sort of the end of that story ultimately could have been a lot different had we gone to that tobacco factory.
With these scams, I think maybe they play on politeness not to say anything to them and go. But then also, if there's a group of us, you don't want to be the guy that kind of stops it from happening, particularly when we don't know each other that well, when we're traveling together and just meeting each other and then wanting to go on various expeditions. You don't want to be the stick in the mud, and that kind of works to the effect of the scam.
That's so true. You just really have to trust your gut, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Josh, for joining us for our first Little Lies segment, and also letting us hear about art residency in China. I've really enjoyed catching up with you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. I hope we've inspired you on your travels, or maybe given you the push to take off. In either case, don't forget to download the Travel Talk app from your app store. This has been Travel Talking, and I've been Rhiannon Monks. We'll be back with more, and until then.